church is from 1873. Sorry, 37. And it resembles kind of like the churches have been prior to that age. Just very simple, just wood inside, some carvings with some symbols that symbol some Christian faith. I'm not so sure about that, but it's both love and that is the tree of life and different, yeah. And in the old days, the church was the only room or the only building that was common for everybody to meet in. Usually people would have really small houses. As you might have discovered, there are not so many trees in the islands. So tree was a very scarce commodity. It was very important to treat tree with respect because everything had to be used for buildings, for tools, never for burning. So the houses were heated, or in the extent they were heated at all, was they used peat, which is unrotted material that is usually in the wetlands. So you can dig it out, it's the beginning of coal, and dry it first, and then you can burn it. So that's what they did for a lot of during the summer period. And given that there was this climate, it would be a very good, or be a challenge to dry. But that's what they had. And so the wood would only be used for building and for, tools and so on. And in those days, the churches are in almost every village. And the church is today at least it's the state church, the Lutheran church, since the Reformation, and before the Reformation it was the Catholic church. And here in the islands we have our own Faroese language, but we didn't have a writing language until the beginning of last century, or started to be developed in 1850s and onwards. So in those days, most of the pastors were Danish, so they would come to the islands and live here mostly for their whole life. And there were very few educated people in those days, very few, especially Faroese people. So the pastors would be the only educated person in the area. And since there are many more churches than pastors, the pastors would then travel around from one church to the other. And at the Sunday services, they would not be able to be at all the churches. So there would be a deacon who would perform the services, and he would then read a written text, maybe that the pastor has written, or there were also books that were giving out that were published, and then they could read, the deacon could read. The pastor would always be attending from the pulpit, and when the pastor was not present, then the deacon would perform the services, and then he would not be allowed to address the people from the pulpit, so then he would be standing here instead. So this is where the preaching would go on, and he would just read some text and some prayers. The church, as I said, was the only room that was accessible for all people. And in those days, people would, it was very important to meet in church. It was also a society that was facing a hardship, and imagining that we'd go out in the ocean. We came from Norway, it's said, 1,000 years ago or so, with big Viking ships, but how do you build big Viking ships with no trees? It's not possible, and that's why our boats are much smaller, and typically 8-man rowing boats, which you can see an example of here. And typical in a Faroese church is there is some kind of ocean-going vessel hanging from the ceiling, which is probably two things about it. Everybody knew that this boat was the only way they could get food from the ocean. So it was a choice between not having enough food for especially the poorer part of the population, or facing the ocean with the dangers that involved. So many people have lost dear ones in the ocean. It's said about 1/3 of all men died on the ocean if you go 200 years back. And the other thing is that in the Bible, it also is a very good reminder or a resemblance of a person's life to be like a boat on the ocean. It can be very rocky, it can be good weather, and as we say in a Faroese song, it's only about an inch between life and death. The